Good morning to all and welcome for this our new session of this Heritage of Islamic Architectural Legacy. And I humbly welcome to Nasreen Kausar madam, and I request her to start our today's presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the day 9 presentation. Once again, I'll share my screen. It's clear, right, sir?
Yes, perfect.
Welcome again for the Islamic architectural legacy in the lands of Islam. So today's topic will be Safavid Empire. We will try to understand the city Isfahan, which was under Shah Abbas, and also we'll understand international trade and the king's silk monopoly in today's session. So objectives for today's session is we will try to explore the development of Safavid Empire, and we'll also try to understand how it reached its apex as a capital city of Isfahan, the city as a global metropolis, which was characterized by its economic growth, cultural efflorescence, and social diversity. So throughout this session, we will explore how it was that the city evolved, and as well as how it embodied ideas about the ruler, the state, and society, in addition to cultivating an economic upsurge. And what is the story that the city is telling us about the Safavid elite and its relationship to its multi-ethnic, multi-confessional population. So multi-confessional means different religious populations. So we will try to understand this. So let's understand a little bit of historical context of Safavid Empire. So here you can see different rulers who ruled in Safavid Empire. So first one is the Shah Ismaili. So he ruled from 1500 to 1501 to 1524. So during his reign, he made Tabriz as his capital. And next is the Shah Tahmasp. So he ruled from 1524 to 1576. So during his reign, he made Qazvin as capital in 1548. So during these eras, usually Ottomans used to have a lot of incursions on these Safavid empires. So Qazvin was less vulnerable to Ottoman incursions. So they made that as a capital. Next, coming to Shah Abbas, he ruled from 1587 to 1629. He made Isfahan as his capital. So Isfahan became a thriving metropolis and was known as Nasfe Jahan, or half the world, as it became a global center of commerce and culture. So next, Shah Abbas' nephew, Shah Safi, he became the empire. So he became the emperor. So he ruled from 1629 to 1642. So Safi's son, Shah Abbas II, he started reigning from 1642 to 1666. So after Shah Abbas II, there was a decrease in court patronage of architecture and arts. So we can see there was increase in European control of trade with Safavid Iran after Shah Abbas II. So Safavids had three major claims to authority, which set them apart from their Sunni neighbors, that is the Ottomans and the Mughals. The first claim was to power the pre-Islamic tradition of divine kingship. The second claim to power was their lineage as Sayyids or descendants of Prophet Muhammad. The third role that the Safavid kings used to legitimate their rule was as the head of the Safavid order. So here you can see three Islamic empires which were dominant from almost from southern Europe to northern India. This was between 1500 to 1800 century, these eras. So here you can see in the purple Ottoman Empire. This is the stretch of Ottoman Empire. They ruled the Balkans, the Levant, and also North Africa, Eastern Europe. Then you can see this light blue color. This is Safavids Empire. They ruled territory similar to modern Iran. And then you can see Mughals. So these Mughals, they ruled parts of modern day Pakistan. Then you have Afghanistan and northern India. So the Safavids, who were Shiite Muslims, they were all they were enclosed on all sides by these Sunni polities. So over the course of 1500s, there was a significant amount of territorial exchange between the three dynastic groups. So here you can see the Shah Abbas, who ruled from 1587 to 1629. And he successfully defeated the Ottomans in 1611. And he inaugurated the long period of political stability of the Safavids. During his rule, he made a series of important reforms to Safavid society and the bureaucracy. So he also developed the economy by increasing contacts with the European states, and his reign witnessed the arrival of East India Company. He also relocated an entire community of Christian Armenians from Julfa in Azerbaijan to New Julfa. So New Julfa was, he made a new community which was near to Isfahan. The Armenian community was deeply involved in the trade of silk and textiles. So their extensive trade networks reached almost from Amsterdam to Manila. So New Julfa was built on the opposite side of the river from Isfahan. So by 1619, the state held a monopoly over silk production. So this brought about rapid changes in the Safavid economy. So here we can understand the growth of Isfahan. So in the first 27 years after Isfahan's foundation, estimates suggest the population increased from about 70,000 to about 2 lakhs. So this extraordinary growth was experienced by the city during this period. So as in earlier centuries, there were various European powers that sent embassies to the Safavids in order to broker alliances with various European states. So often with the goal of undermining Ottoman authority and their control of the Mediterranean and the Balkans. So there is an incredible corpus of material from this period that describes aspects of Safavid society. So that is the Safavid court, portraits, and also some paintings. So portraits of Safavid kings and all we can see. So all of the reforms Shah Abbas initiated led to a broad change in the economy, code patronage, architecture, as well as paintings. So Isfahan was the locus of this cosmopolitanism, a city swelling in size, bustling with trade, inhabited by different kinds of racial, ethnic, and also many different religious groups. So more than any city in Europe, Isfahan had a diversity of people transiting through its spaces and also living in it. So it is located on an elevated plain between the Zagros mountains and the Dashte Kavir desert. So here you can see this is the Zagros mountain and here is the Dashte Kavir desert. So in between you can see this is the Isfahan. And here is Azerbaijan, from where the the Christian population were transported and they were made to settle in New Julfa. So that was near to Isfahan. So as I told that it is near the Zagros mountain, in between the Zagros mountain and the Dashte Kavir desert, it also favored due to this proximity of a larger river. So they also had a river, that is the name of that river was Zayanda Rud River. So which brought an ample supply of water. It is also ideally located to benefit from extraction of water from the mountain aquifers. The aquifers are tapped through underground irrigation channels called Kanath or Karis, and that water is directed through channels towards the alluvial plains, villages, and towns. Isfahan offers a perfect location in terms of its water supply. So, of all the architectural projects that were sponsored by the Safavid elite, Isfahan is the one that leaves the most visible legacy today. So, Tabriz was the first capital, as we know, in 1501, and Qazvin was the second capital, that was in 1548. So, there is a great documentary evidence explaining what was constructed in those cities and their general appearances. So, in the case of Qazvin, there are long ekphrastic poems written by a courtier named Abdi Beg Shirazi Navidi, who left lengthy descriptions of its gardens, palaces, pavilions, for which there are no physical remains. Right now, we cannot see them. We can just see with these kind of paintings. So for Tabriz and Qazvin, we know that the Safavids were active new builders in those cities, and that they also sponsored repairs and refurbishments to historical buildings. So it is only in Isfahan that we are able to look closely at how the Safavids responded to an existing building tradition and a particular urban formation, and to see what changes they made. So we can see that as a best example. So the chief period of change in Isfahan was under Shah Abbas, who founded this city as a capital and continued its development in the first 3 decades of the 17th century. So a set of developments sponsored by his successors continued into mid 17th century also. So one of the main questions that arises about Safavid Isfahan is whether there was an urban master plan or concept for the city as a whole at the outset, or whether it was the result of an organic development with each part built in response to another as a casual chain. So the city was dubbed with a plan, or maybe you can call it as a map of the world, that is called as they call that as a Nakshe Jahan. So this name suggests that there was a total concept generated for the formation of the city. We should think about how it was that the city evolved, but also how it embodied ideas about the ruler, the state, and the society in addition to supporting economic growth. What is the story that the city tells us about the Safavid elite and its relationship to the multi-ethnic, multi-confessional population? So we can understand by its urban planning and also a lot of examples. So here you can see some of the architectural spaces or maybe monuments with their timelines. That is, you can see Maidan-e-Nakshe Jahan. So this is Maidan-e-Nakshe Jahan. So it was built in 2 phases, 1590 to 95, the first phase, and the second phase, 1602 to 3. Then you have the Kesaria Bazaar, which is on the on this space. This is the space of Kesaria Bazaar, which was built in 1591 to 1603. Then you have Masjid-e-Shah. The location of that is over here, and it was built in 1602 to 1616. Then Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah. So it is on this corner. It's 1603 to 1619. Then we have Bagh-e Abbasad, which is somewhere over here. And then Kaiban, that is Char Bagh. So this is the Char Bagh. So we can understand that in our next slides better way. So the principal move that Shah Abbas makes involved the reorientation of the city. So we have the Great Maidan. This is the Great Maidan. It is also called as a central square. So these are the two masjids built on either side. This is the Masjid-e-Shah and this is Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah. The palace. So the palace is built along one side of the Maidan and a large avenue. So this is actually here the palace is not seen, only the entrance of the palace. This is Ali Kapu. This is called as Ali Kapu. This is the entrance way of the, so here was the palace. So you can see the palace over here. So this whole campus is the palace campus. So here, this one. Also, you can see Charbagh, which extends behind the palace towards the Zayanda Rud River. So this is the Charbagh, and here you can see the Zayanda Rud River, which is Charbagh is extending towards the Zayanda Rud River. The other side of the Charbagh extends Armenian Quarter. So here, after this, there is Armenian Quarter, that is the New Julfa. So this is where the Christians from Azerbaijan, they were shifted to New Julfa. So all of these new developments took place under the rule of Shah Abbas. So here you can understand in a better way. The former location of city center was the old Friday mosque, that was Masjid-e-Jami. So Masjid-e-Jami was somewhere here. This was before Masjid-e-Shah. So this was built in the 9th century. This continued to be the city center in later periods, chiefly under Seljuks into 12th century also. Later, the Friday Mosque was built. So this was the Friday Mosque later built in proximity to this central square with a commercial district growing up around it. So Shah Abbas created a new pole of attraction in the construction of building and the provision of amenities in the royal square of this Maidan-e-Nakshe-Jahan. So in an earlier period, this zone was in fact patronized by Safavid kings. So Shah Ismail had built a tomb and a mosque in Isfahan, and there was also another shrine called Harun-e-Vilayat, built in 1513. So here the Royal Maidan became the new focus of city life, built in two phases. So this Royal Maidan, as I told, it was built in two phases, 1590 and 1590 to 95, the first phase, and then 1602 to 3, second phase. So here, this is the Maidan. To understand in a better way, you can see this is the palace, and this was the Charbagh, and this is the Zayanda river. This is Abbasabad, and you have the Julfa. So the Armenian Christians from Azerbaijan came over here, and this was the old city center, and later this became the new city center. So coming to the Kesaria Bazaar at the top of the Maidan. So this is the Maidan. So here, this is the Kesaria Bazaar, what you can see over here, and this is the Masjid-e-Shah, Masjid-e-Lutfullah, and then this is the Ali Kapu, which is going inside the palace ground. So this bazaar was called as Kesaria Bazaar, which was built shortly after the Maidan. On the southern side, you can see the precincts whose construction was initiated in 1590. And Shah Abbas aimed to make the Royal Maidan an alluring space with a commercial character, linked to the old centers of power and wealth through the Kesaria Bazaar and a long dome-covered street. So here you can see the Kesaria Bazaar with dome-covered streets. The economic life of the city was one of the ways to manipulate its pole of attraction. So here you can see the Masjid-e-Shah in a closer look, and these are the commercial shops, and this was the central square. And in 1603, the construction of the Masjid-e-Shah is initiated, and completed in its first stage in 1616, with additions made later by two successors, that is Shah Safi and Shah Abbas II. So this, in this view, this is the Masjid-e-Shah. So you can see a closer look of Masjid-e-Shah again. This structure is built behind the arcades of shops. As we saw, these are the arcades of shops of the Maidan. However, in order to meet Qibla, it involves a clever bent orientation of the building. You can see the off-axis of the rectangular Maidan. The entrance here, this is the entrance of the mosque, is resolved by a sequence of Ivans built over the courtyard that bring the visitors into the building interior through the bent axis. So the worshippers must pass through this vestibule and dome-covered entranceway, as well as moving through a series of corridors that flank the Ivan and the courtyard. After entering the building and making that slow turn through its passageways, one forgets that he or she has shifted orientation and it is concealed in the passage through the building. So here you can understand in a better way again. So these are the shops, these are the four Ivans, and then you have the bent orientation towards the Qibla wall. So this was the central courtyard of the Masjid-e-Shah. So the building itself is a multifunctional structure, Masjid-e-Shah, and it is a Friday mosque with four Ivans arranged around the courtyard, supporting domes of different sizes. The different sizes of the domes marks their relative importance, creating hierarchy of separate spaces. The units at the corner, so these corners are two madrasas, two theological colleges integrated within the ensemble plan of the Masjid-e-Shah. Coming to the decoration of the Masjid-e-Shah, the building is completely covered with a technique called 7 colors, that is haft rangi, of ceramic glazing that's simulated mosaic faience. So we understood the mosaic faience in our previous session, that is in the Timurid architecture. So mosaic faience is a jigsaw of polychrome glazed ceramic used in Timurid architecture. So with the haft rangi means, as I told, it's 7 color. The labor, it's a very labor intensive and expensive technique of mosaic faience. And this can be simulated by simply decorating a tile with 7 colors of ceramic glaze that is baked in a single firing. The complex includes a variety of decorations that uses vegetal motifs and also geometrical forms. So here there is also an extensive inscription and epigraphic program that consists of dedicatory texts that includes the words of God and also Prophet Muhammad and also Ali, with blessings directed to them. So this is also the inscriptions, what you can see here. So the inscriptions also record the endowment deed and indicate that the building was dedicated by Shah Tahmasp and the 12th Imam. So some of the inscriptions were designed by the calligrapher Ali Riza Abbas. So another advantage of the haft rangi technique was that it permits the translation of paper used by a calligrapher without sacrificing the quality of the calligraphy. So some of the designs were arranged in patterns which can also be found in carpets and also in textiles. So this demonstrates a strong degree of intermediarity using similar motifs across a diverse range of mediums. So in its plan, there is a great correspondence between the Masjid-e-Shah and also Timurid prototypes from 15th century found across the greater Iran and also in Central Asia. So this concordance can be shown through aspects of the decoration and also with respect to plan and specifically the use of Ivans on the courtyards. So the concept of this complex, which combines a number of different functions into a single footprint through ensemble planning, has a long history of Iranian, Central Asian, and also Anatolian architecture. So here, Muhib Ali Beg was responsible for negotiating with the former owners of the land, and Ustad Ali Beg Isfahani was both Muhandis and Mimar. So Muhandis means engineer. So this Ali Beg Isfahani was the engineer, Muhandis, and he was also a Mimar. Mimar means architect. He was also a project architect. So on the other feature of the Masjid-e-Shah is a small storage closet in the mihrab recess, which originally contained 2 relics over here. So one of the relics is a copy of the Quran that was believed to be copied by the 8th Shia Imam Riza, as well as the blood-stained robe of the 3rd Imam Hussein. So in addition to being dedicated to the Mahdi, the occulted 12th Imam, by containing relics imbued with the presence of the body of these additional Imams, this whole mosque was endowed with a heightened level of sanctity. So another building that made a Maidan, a locus of religious worship, was Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah. So this was built between 1603 to 1619. The mosque construction began just after the Masjid-e-Shah. So after they completed Masjid-e-Shah, they did the second mosque, which was Masjid-e-Lutfullah. It has been understood as a private oratory of Shah Abbas. It does not have the monumental scale of the Masjid-e-Shah. So this is a little smaller than Masjid-e-Shah. So it marks a significant break with all the pre-existing Safavid and Timurid mosques through its highly centralized plan. So the mosque is set at a diagonal to the facade and the Maidan, and the entrance of the interior of the mosque is then negotiated by entering 2 Ivans of decreasing scale. The path then guides the worshippers through the L-shaped corridor. So this is that L-shaped corridor, which runs along the outer wall of the square-shaped mosque. So this corridor leads to the center of the domed prayer space. So again, there is a clever way to resolve the discordant axis between the line of the Maidan and also the Qibla. As we saw in the Masjid-e-Shah, same way cleverly they have oriented towards the Qibla, and enhances the experience of transition between the worldly, lively Maidan and the peaceful, sacred space of prayer. So coming to the decorations, like the Masjid-e-Shah, the edifice is completely sheathed in colored tiles of Haftarangi, that is 7-color technique here also. So similar to the Masjid-e-Shah, it is dedicated to the 12 infallible Imams, the Ithna Ashari of 12 Shiism. So we can see that both the masjids were dedicated for these 12 Imams. So here, the mosque of Sheikh Lutfullah was named after a teacher and also a scholar who came from Syria. He started his teaching career at the shrine complex of Imam Riza in Mashhad. He fled the city of Mashhad and moved to Qazvin in 1588. So in 1603, Shah Abbas invited Sheikh Lutfullah to Isfahan to lead classes there. So he also led Friday prayers. He was the prayer leader, and mosque was built in proximity to a madrasa, and there were also a series of madrasas added around the Maidan to the north and east, which emphasized this location as a place of religious worship and also instructions. So here, coming to the religious life of Maidan-e-Shah, we will just have again a little bit of details of that. So Masjid-e-Shah was a multifunctional mosque complex built at the opposite end of the Maidan, whose construction required the acquisition of land from former residential and garden owners. So Masjid-e-Shah and the Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah were also accompanied by additional madrasas built in proximity to the Maidan. So this enhanced the religious function of the site. The new Maidan's centrality within the Isfahan was secured through its layout. The mosques were dedicated to the 12 infallible imams of Shiism, the Safavid the state religion, and there were other dedications made to the buildings to members of the Safavid house, which emphasized the genealogical connections between Shah Abbas and the dynasty's founders. So the Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah was not only provided by the Shah with the amenities and infrastructures for religious worship, but also instructions in the schools of religious thought, which were being directly shaped through the appointments of particular religious clerics installed by ruler. So now we'll understand about the international trade and the king's monopoly. So some useful terms, Ali Kapu, as I showed, it is a high gate, or it also can be called as a sublime porte. And here, this is where patrons of Shah Abbas and others used to sit. Next, you have the Charbagh. It's a vegetation surrounding the central promenade. So Khiyaban means it's a avenue promenade. Then Talar means it's a colonnaded veranda or a porch. Karina means bilateral symmetry. So here we'll have a little bit of highlights on international trade under Safavids. The chief period of change for the city of Isfahan was under Shah Abbas, who founded the city as the capital and continued its development in the first 3 decades of the 17th century. So the architectural and social formation of Safavid Isfahan was in large shaped by the political and economic aims of Shah Abbas and also his successors. The socio-political reorganization shared in the alliances and competitions among vested groups, and this included the royal monopoly in the silk trade and their Armenian and also European facilitators, as well as capitalists' ventures of the new mercantile communities that engaged in long-distance trade. So this shift towards international trade was made possible in large part through the relocation of the Armenian community to Isfahan's suburb, that is New Jilfa. So as I told, they were shifted from Azerbaijan. So these economic changes were accompanied by the rise of the urban class that could build sizable houses and partake in the modes of sociability. So where painters, poets, and also entertainers mingled with merchants, also with craftsmen and functionaries. So Shah Abbas aimed to make his new Maidan a center for economic and also for religious life. So this Maidan, it became center for economic and also religious life. So this urban development was staged as a series of overlapping independent and contemporaneous building campaigns. So through which the Maidan was crystallized as a center of public life. The economic components of the Maidan were chiefly expressed through the shops that ran around the square and the Kesaria Bazaar, whose properties the Shah owned in perpetuity, charging rents from the occupants. The bazaar had street-lined, as you can see here, the bazaar had street-lined shops and larger storage depots in the form of caravanserais, also connected the new center of public and commercial life to the old Maidan through a longer street. So in terms of its religious life, we know that the Masjid Sheikh Lutfullah was also built, and also we understood about the Masjid Shah, and we understood its structure also. So coming to Charbagh Promenade, so the western side of the Maidan was the site of Shah Abbas Palace. So I showed you the palace of Shah Abbas. So behind this palace ground, which then gave way on its backside to a long tree-lined avenue called the Khiyaban, with a surrounding area called the Charbagh. So this is the Charbagh. This was a sequence of planted gardens with mansions occupied by the most elite nobles of Safavid society. That then gave way on the other side of the Zianda Rud River to another zone called the Abbasabad. This was another zone of formerly planted gardens that was also beautified with mansions for the nobles. So here you can see the New Jilfa, which was adjacent to the Abbasabad. So that was the city of New Jilfa, which was designated as a space for the relocated community of Armenian Christians who were made to come from the coast of the Caspian Sea from the regions of Mazandaran and Georgia. So they were being made to settle in this particular New Jilfa and develop their silk trade. So they played a major role in developing the state's participation in the international silk industry. So here, this is the Allawardi Khan Bridge, connected the elite districts of Isfahan on the north bank of the Zainda River to the suburb of New Jilfa, occupied by the wealthy Armenian merchant families. So throughout the city, in its suburbs, all around the main core, there were various districts inhabited by the Muslims as well as Jewish and Christian communities. So there was also Zoroastrian population residents in Isfahan. Apart from Muslims, Jewish and Christians, you can also see Zoroastrian populations. So another source of Isfahan's diversity was its role of cosmopolitan capital of the Safavid Empire. So the visitors traveled to Isfahan from different European territories and also from India. So together, the palatial, residential, commercial, and also religious spaces of life in Isfahan were tightly integrated into an urban scheme. The various spaces of urban life were organized through axial orders running north to south and east to west, with the facade of the buildings built on the Maidan in communication with the other. So here you can see the axial arrangements. So the portal of the Masjid-e-Shah sits on axis with the entrance to the Kesaria Bazaar. So here you can see Kesaria Bazaar was somewhere over here, and this is the Masjid-e-Shah. So this was in the axis. So here you can see the similarly recessed portal of the Masjid-e-Sheikh Lutfullah. So here you can see the portal is recessed inside, and it is in axis with the high gate. This high gate is called as Ali Kapu, which is the chief ceremonial entrance to the palace grounds. So this is the palace grounds. So these kinds of diametric correspondences situating the significant buildings on axis running north to south and also east to west was a means of rendering visible a legible order, both in terms of the function of these monuments and their interrelationship to each other. So ultimately, this planning arranges the monuments so as stress the rule of the Shah as the autocratic ruler who presided over all of these societal social elements. So the chief ceremonial entrance, that is the Ali Kapu, was a high gate to the palace grounds on the western side. So this was the Ali Kapu, what we see over here, the same thing from front. So spatially, this structure is in dialogue with the recessed portal of the Masjid-e Sheikh Lutfullah on the other side of the Maidan. So the two are built to approximately the same height, creating a balanced relationship across the east-west axis of the Maidan. So here, this Sheikh Lutfullah Masjid and this one, both are approximately same height in the same axis. Both edifices also vie for attention and comparison through elaborately ornamented facades. So the chief difference between these buildings in terms of how they spatially interact with the Maidan is that the portal of the Ali Kapu, it's projecting out. As you can see, it is projecting out from the line of the shops, encircling the Maidan on 2 floors. By contrast, the portal of Sheikh Lutfullah, as you can see, this portal is recessed inside. It is not projected outside. So these kind of diametric correspondences were also true in the Ali Kapu in relation to the Masjid-e-Shah to the southern end of the square. So one of the advantages of the Ali Kapu projecting out from the line of shops is that it gives an enhanced view to the Masjid-e-Shah, which is announced on the square through its portal with its minarets extending upwards from its facade. So the view of this Masjid-e-Shah in the Maidan works as a spectacle of volumes and forms. That is, the building's many domes, ivans, minarets, arched coverings can be seen receding behind the main line of the mosque's internal courtyards. So this produces cleverly orchestrated formal correspondences between these two elements, which further enhances the sacred status of the mosque, along with its possession of two relics housed inside the mihrab of the king's mosque. So this includes a copy of Quran scribed by 8th Imam Riza and the bloodstained robe of the 3rd Imam Hussein. So here you can see the Daulat Khana. So Daulat Khana means the palace ground. So that itself you can call it as, it's the other name of palace ground. It also can be called as House of States. So sometimes it also can be called as Bagh-e-Nakshe-Jahan. That means the garden of the map of the world. Or even Daulat Khana Mubarak-e-Nakshe-Jahan. That is the state house of the blessed map of the world. So it was constructed under Shah Abbas over a 20-year period between 1590 and 1611. A self-enclosed space. So it is a self-enclosed space interposed between the city wall and the Maidan. So this is the city wall and this is that Maidan. So in between is the palace ground. So unlike Mughal and Ottoman palaces, Safavid Palace differs from them in its organization and also operating as a totality within this wall enclosed space. So there is not a single dominant courtyard. You cannot see any single dominant courtyard here, which is around everything organizing radially or even organizing in a axial manner in the courtyard. that ultimately leads to the most private and august spaces. Rather, in these Safavid Palace, it is divided into series of small courtyards with many gardens. There are a number of small and larger enclosed spaces also here with freestanding pavilions and planted gardens and also pools. So the plan overall does not embody a statement of hierarchy. Instead, hierarchy was achieved through the use of spaces and courtly procedures, which determined how and when access has to be given or denied. Access has to be denied. So the space is at one moment a public garden for all occupants of the palace to enjoy, and on the other moment it is like closed off and monitored, and also all the entrances and exits were guarded by the guards. So similar to other palaces studied throughout our course, the whole site embraces a number of different functions. So some of these functions include administrative, state, bureaucratic, residential, and also harem towards southern ends. So these palace ground also had workshops, mint workshops, then music rooms, exhibition space for the royal porcelain collections, etc. So it is also unusual in its unique organization, which brings private and elite spaces into close proximity with public spaces. So the proximity of the ruler to his people was the ultimate expression of the autocratic ruler. The city as a whole is a map of social hierarchy. Its urban landscape structures with public and private spaces are intended to work together towards the betterment of the state under the wise rule of Shah Abbas. So here the High Gate or the Sublime Porte, or you can also call it as Ali Kapu, is initiated in 1597 and continues until 1660. So this building has a complex history of construction that has been revealed through the study of written sources and also archaeological investigations. So this is the building that encapsulates the interface between the square and the palace, between the public and also private spaces. So here you can see it's in the Maidan, it is a public space, and then inside when you go to the palace, it's a private space. So it is not just a gate or a facade that advertises the presence of the palace behind it. It is an incredibly prominent and unprecedented building in its type. So the gate not only announces the ruler's presence here at the square, but also the ways it was used for state gatherings and also for any kind of events. It was used. So here, this is also a space where the king was publicly visible as ruler, accessible to the public in a constant series of spectacles and displays of Safavid the court ceremonies and also happenings. So some European travelers who left some descriptions of city life commented on the king moving freely among his subjects in these spaces. So there are tales of him going out into the city, leaving the palace grounds into the Maidan, and also entering through the city, walking its streets, sampling the wares that artisans had produced. And also he used to eat the street food. So displays of kingship. The famed jeweler and traveler, that is Jean Chardin, spoke of a gathering assembled at the Ali Kapu, where the king, visitors, and also courtiers took part in feasting, also in drinking, and also conduct a lot of state affairs. So while the ruler made agreements with his noblemen, a number of Europeans and Russians were seated at the back and were asked to wait to have a separate discussion with the king. So this is an example of a way in which the ruler structured his asymmetrical relationship to the people who are subservient to him, despite actually sitting in the room with them. So this Ali Kapu was itself a public stage, as well as a place where the Shah would stand from the edge of the hall. So the edge of the hall is called as talar, and enthroned on a portable seat or a platform. So that platform is called as takht, and would observe activities taking place in the Maidan. So numerous events took place in the Maidan, including military parades, horse riding, polo matches, firework displays, and lot many more activities. So this platform that protrudes from the line of Maidan conceals the main entrance below, and the talar, this colonnaded portico, rises up above the entrance portal. So here you can see the backside, back of the building of this Ali Kapu. There is a tower which was built as a multi-story component, housing rooms, different rooms, used for many different functions. So these uses include maybe administrative, judicial, or maybe public and any private receptions. Also, maybe some musical performances would have happened over here. So the building has an advanced system of acoustics, and also you can see plaster forms carved in the shape of instruments of the ceiling serve to dampen the echo of the hall, making the sound of the performance equally clear to those near and also far. So in another room, there were niches carved from plaster that were niches carved with a lot of like plaster, and also they had porcelain collections gathered by earlier Safavid rulers. So this was the kind of decorations what they had in Ali Kapu. So here we will end the Safavid Empire and some of its architectural detailing and the urban planning of the Isfahan. So any questions you can ask me. So thank you for your attention. Over to you, Dr. Bhujan.
Yes, thank you, thanks a lot. And it's again a wonderful journey of our this heritage of Islamic architecture. And with the different dynasties, we can see this all the things, and some kings, कुछ kings ने इस तरह का भी गार्डन बनाया था कि जहाँ पर हम दुनिया का नक्शा देख सके. सो ये इस तरह के आर्किटेक्चर के इसमें हमें कभी ऐसा लगता है कि दुनिया में जितने ब्यूटीफुल गार्डन्स जो बनाए गए, तो बागे शाम वगैरह हमारे यहाँ पे महाराष्ट्र में लातूर डिस्ट्रिक्ट वगैरह हम देखें तो छोटे छोटे गांव में उदगीर जैसा जो तालुका प्लेस है, वहां पर मिडिवल पीरियड में बागे शाम, बागे हिस्साम, ऐसे अलग अलग गार्डन्स बनाए गए थे. तो ऐसा लगता है ये भी एक स्पेशलिटी रही है इस इस्लामिक आर्किटेक्चर की. तो ये जानकारी आज हमें प्राप्त हुई. सो इट्स अ वंडरफुल इंफॉर्मेशन, and in future also we will meet with some new aspects of this heritage, and up to that time I'm thankful to you, and we are also thankful to all the participants from all over the world. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you. Thank you, sir.